improvement in education, but there have been some serious changes in education that need to be corrected. We used to have qualified teachers doing teaching, but the government has chosen not to have qualified teachers doing that teaching, and we have been very disappointed in the attempts at privatisation of the educational process, which now fails to give the standard of education that we want.
The New South Wales Liberals and National Government priority is community safety. To achieve community safety, we invest in evidence-based programs to break the cycle of crime, evaluate programs targeting complex problems like substance abuse, violence and sexual offending, to ensure the programs maximising value for taxpayers' money, and to refine those programs to ensure they deliver the best possible results for the New South Wales community. Our government has converted its strong financial management into significant investment in diversionary social crime prevention strategies that improve community safety. The government's investing a record $330 million in programs to reduce reoffending rates. In fact, reducing adult reoffending by 5% is one of the government's state priorities. The government's strategy to reduce reoffending includes, firstly, earlier targeting of persistent reoffenders and repeat offenders charged with domestic violence offences, building on the existing evidence-based community corrections model to significantly improve its ability to affect behavioural change in offenders, identifying prisoners' reintegration needs on their entry into prison and in planning for their release, and investing $20 million to establish 10 high-intensity units to deliver programs to prisoners serving short sentences of less than 6 months. Now, the government recognises that diversion from criminal justice, where appropriate, is an important piece of the puzzle in keeping our community safe. Last year, the government announced $250,000 in funding for the Mouse's Reinvestment Project in Bourke to establish a project to assist communities across New South Wales who have expressed interest in establishing their own justice reinvestment projects. The government has piloted the Family Investment Model Program in Dubbo and Kempsey, aimed at addressing entrenched multi-generational disadvantage and offending by co-locating staff from government agencies to work intensively with families. The Australian Institute of Criminology is currently evaluating the program following a 2-year trial. Reforms have included 2 reviews by the former ALP Attorney General John Hatzistikos, now Judge of the District Court, and the Sentencing Council report on bail, and it also includes the New South Wales Government response to the Martin Place siege. The government has implemented the recommendations of those 3 reviews, and the current bail system places safety of the community first. Now turning to Indigenous issues. The overrepresentation of Aboriginal people in the criminal justice system is a national tragedy. As the Australian Law Reform Commission found in their 2018 report, Pathways to Justice, the criminal justice system is only one of the many factors in a larger historical, social and economic context across areas including education, health, housing and employment that contributes to the overrepresentation. The issues cannot be considered in isolation. That is why the government is implementing a whole-of-government approach that recognises and addresses the key underlying causes of Aboriginal disadvantage across portfolios including health, education, family and community services and skills. If I can just turn to women in prison. The New South Wales women inmate population is increasing and that is concerning. Corrective Services recognises the substantial impact of incarceration on women, particularly as they are more likely to have dependent children, to have suffered trauma and to experience substance abuse and mental health issues. The government has introduced 3 high-intensity program units focused exclusively on the needs of female offenders at Dilwinia, Mid-North Coast and Wellington Correctional Service Centres. With regard to juveniles in justice, the New South Wales Liberals and National Government is committed to preventing juveniles becoming entrenched in the criminal justice system. I mentioned it previously, but earlier this year the new Curry Court at Surrey Hill sat for the first time. The court commenced at Parramatta in 2015 and this year government doubled its capacity. Can I just finish by saying one thing in addition to our response on education in custody? I'm advised that the Corrective Services New South Wales is trialling the use of laptops in cells for educational purposes at the South Coast Correctional Centre and laptops in classrooms at the Mid-North Coast Correctional Centre. Further expansion of the use of laptops will be considered following the completion of the trials. Further, inmates of rapid building prisons in Cessnock and Wellington have access to electronic devices in their cells for restricted purposes. There are particular security issues in relation to electronic devices and computer use, which is one of the reasons for the progressive rolling up of those initiatives.
As a Greens MP, I represent a party that is committed to erring on the side of communities, not prisons, investing in people and building people up and giving them a second chance rather than putting them behind bars and taking them from their families, their kids, their jobs, their education and their opportunities. And for decades we have seen state governments of both Labor and the Coalition instead make decisions about building more prisons, make decisions with scarce state funds about more judges and more police and more prison beds rather than more school lunches, more rehabilitation programs, more investment in TAFE, more lifting people out of poverty. And we've now seen the result. New South Wales now has a near record prison population. In fact, the last quarter saw a tiny reduction in the prison population. But last year, the New South Wales prison population hit a record level. And it hit a record level at a time when New South Wales also had the record low rates of violent offending. The studies tend to show that increasing length of time that people serve in prison is not a deterrent, such as increased employment, increased opportunity, better housing, better health, driver education. They're the changes that have seen a safer society. And the contribution that this record spend on prisons has made is minuscule, almost statistically irrelevant if you look at the studies that have been produced by Foxner. So 35% of the prison population in jail in December at the end of last year, 35% of the prisoners have not been convicted of anything. They were held on remand, having been refused bail, awaiting a trial in a criminal justice system that is hopelessly clogged, some of them waiting 18 months or 2 years to get a trial. And that denial of bail is a de facto criminal punishment for thousands, some 4,586 prisoners. And I've got to say, the program of reforms, those set of specific statutory reforms set out in the Community Justice Coalition package, will form the centrepiece of a set of bail law reforms that we will bring to Parliament with the goal of reducing the remand population by 50%. All it will do is reduce the remand population in New South Wales jails to be similar as a proportion of the jail population with the remand population in countries like Germany, Austria, and get this, the United States. And we won't get anywhere near meeting the target, which I think should be a long-term target, of getting to the proportion in Spain, where just 13.4% of the prison population in Spain is held on remand. Fundamentally changing our bail laws, respecting the presumption of innocence, is not only good policy, but it also is a major economic saving. Radical steps are needed if we are to stop Australia's First Nations peoples from continuing to be the most imprisoned people on the planet. That 1/4 of all the men in jail tonight, 1/4 are Aboriginal men from an adult population of just 2.5% of the population, and 1/3 of the women, 1/3 of the women in jail tonight will be Aboriginal women, First Nations women. And we know from answers that indeed we got from the Attorney General in the latest round of budget estimates, 60% of all the women in jail tonight, 60% of them have a dependent child, at least one dependent child. And when you drill down further into the social history of those women in jail, overwhelmingly they are victims of violence themselves. Victims of domestic violence, victims of serious physical assaults, and we are criminalising disadvantage by putting out. We will be bringing in this state election a bold set of reforms on de-incarceration of Aboriginal people and First Nations peoples, and we will be announcing that package later in the election. And we believe that justice reinvestment solutions should be the first answer we have, particularly in regional and rural New South Wales, and we're committing to a $50 million justice reinvestment grants fund that will go over the 5 years to help deliver those projects. It's not necessarily about more money from health. It's not necessarily about more money from police. It's not necessarily about more money from housing. It's about making those agencies work together and deliver on the priorities of the community. That's what justice reinvestment is. We want to commit to ending the privatisation, not just that prison, cancelling that contract, but ending the privatisation of the prison. We want to break the cycle of trauma, particularly for women. We believe that with the savings that we get from bail law reforms, one of the key investments is on trauma-informed counselling for women in jail. We know that most women in jail have suffered a major series of personal traumas in their life, and almost no women in prison get access to trauma-informed counselling. It's got to start with trauma-informed counselling, and it's got to have serious ongoing investment in programs like Shine to ensure that connections with kids are kept while women are in jail. And two last projects both relate to education. We commit to continuing to push, as we have, to return public educators to New South Wales prisons. 100% we need fully fledged, fully funded, fully qualified public teachers in our jails, and we need to be teaching a wide array of projects. And the last thing I'll say is this: year-round education in juvenile justice centres.
The Socialist Alliance opposes the law and order bidding war between the major parties. We oppose prison privatisation, cuts to prison services and to their rights. We oppose the moves by major parties toward mandatory sentencing and shifting of focus from rehabilitation to deterrence. We commit to reversing all of these reactionary changes and to building campaigns and movements and working with unions and organisations such as Community Justice Coalition so that we can do this. Socialist Alliance is an active participant in the campaigns against Aboriginal deaths in custody and supports the full implementation of the recommendations of the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody. The disproportionate rates of incarceration of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander communities reflect the extreme racial oppression and economic marginalisation faced by these communities. The above measures, implementing the recommendations of the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody, these measures would help reduce these disproportionate incarceration rates and as a consequence reduce the risks of deaths in custody. Women, especially from Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander communities, have special needs and have different family and kinship obligations that need to be recognised.
You go into prisons and you talk to prisoners and you talk to prison educators. Sometimes some of the most valuable ways of getting prisoners to re-engage with education isn't maths or literacy. When you talk about a 68-year-old former steelworker who's been in jail for 15 years and say, do you want to go through and do the numeracy and literacy arguments? It probably put his mind close to that. But if you offer them art or music courses and you engage them with the project of education, that's when you can then open the doors to education and open that pathway out. And those programs have just been snatched by the state government for no reason other than some sort of brutal approach that it should just be about literacy and numeracy by unskilled teachers. That's what
I think the governments are actually on a policy, particularly in New South Wales, when you look at the strip searching, the sniffer dogging, and you look at the privatisation of the education systems within prisons, I think the government is actually on a fairly conscious drive to try and intimidate the population, to intimidate marginalised communities further, and that's the law and order pitch, that's the deterrence pitch. And all of the evidence shows that both diversionary programs work, so assisting families who are in threat in terms of having their stolen, but also in threat in terms of families in jail, parents in jail and so on, assisting those children and extended family with services and funding. All of that shows that reduces imprisonment rates, but the government isn't implementing those programs en masse. Instead, they are strip searching, they are sniffer dogging, and they are imprisoning at higher rates, and they are killing more Aboriginal people in jail at higher rates. So this means that there's a fairly conscious approach, I think, from the governments to continue along this path.
I think it's very important to not only look at the quantity of education, but also the quality of education and education outcomes. Now, one significant fact which has been left from the debate is the fact that 40% higher numbers of people who are studying literacy and numeracy in jails now complete their courses than when the government first came into power in 2011. That's incredibly important, that the numbers of people actually finishing their courses in literacy and numeracy. We also have a suite of other work-related and vocational programs, and for some prisoners there's also distance education courses available as well. So I think it's important to realise that not everybody wants the same thing educationally.
Anytime you see a government talking about, telling you that you've got completion rates in the high 90%, and particularly if you're talking about the kind of difficult education environment you have in prison, you have to ask yourself, what does it take to get the tick? And then every educator that I've heard describe these courses is saying they are so unsophisticated, multi-guest, tick-a-box kind of projects, and teaching at such a low level with such low expectations that they're not going to do the job of education in prison. You can get 100% completion rate if what you're asking of the people you're teaching is so little that it's irrelevant to their future life. And I think that's what we're saying. And you know, if the government was genuinely proud of these kind of programs, they would be allowing a third-party peer review of what's actually going on. But instead, it's hidden by secrecy, hidden by private contracts that are commercial in confidence provisions that can't be pierced, and there's no scrutiny or transparency at all about what's going on.
The thing is, what we've got to do in the civil rights movement is we have to think about how to change the balance of power away from the rich and the two major party systems to the people. And part of those people are the ones who are marginalised in prison that we have to stand up on the outside in a very conscious way and say enough. And particularly that's the Aboriginal communities and the deaths in custody cases. We have to follow, we have to stand up, we have to get our unions to support these justice for David Dungay, TJ Hickey, Veronica Baxter. Do not forget this, because they're the communities who are feeling the absolute horrendous brunt of this assault against the marginalised.
So Mark Speakman has, I think, been trying to do what he can within what is a very, I think, conservative coalition party room to try and make some modest changes on sentencing and the like. And for that reason, we've seen a plateauing in our prison population. But at no point has either of those major parties committed to the kind of reforms we need to get it back. And each of those points you make on bail should be at the centre point of any serious political party's discussion about liberty and freedom in a liberal democracy. But I do think, you know, it's easy to just beat up on the government of the day. But the government of the day is also the policies they're putting forward as part of a dysfunctional democracy that we have, where it is so easy for the opposition to make hay on this and get the shock jocks on side and attack whoever wants to make a positive change. This is hard politics. It takes a bit of courage.
And I think that getting people out of remand, getting people out of jail who are on remand is a huge issue that we've got to tackle in a campaign sense, particularly amongst the deaths in custody campaigners, because, you know, what was misdo. I mean, there's a whole bunch of, a litany of murders by the prison system of Aboriginal people who've been on remand, and they shouldn't be on remand. They should, the bail should be a lot easier to get. And so the judges have starting to have their hands tied through these terrible bail conditions that has to be examined and campaigned against. And certainly the Deaths in Custody campaigner organisation ISJA, the Greens, we've presented a lot of claims to the state government, which includes getting people out of jail who are on remand, who aren't there for who are there for non-serious crimes, and that's one of the things that we'll be presenting to Parliament. So we're doing it in a campaign sense because it so relates to the high imprisonment rates of the Aboriginal community.
Two things. Firstly, that under the current Bail Act, bail must be refused if an accused person presents an unacceptable risk if released on bail. In determining this, the court must consider factors such as the nature and seriousness of the offence and whether the accused person has a history of violence. Bail conditions can be imposed to address any concerns that an accused, if released from custody, will endanger the safety of individuals or the community, interfere with witnesses or evidence, fail to attend court or commit a serious offence. Those conditions must be reasonably necessary, appropriate and proportionate to the bail concerns identified. Now, the Department of Justice has committed to undertaking a holistic review of the Bail Act by no later than 6 December 2020. Which will be 4 years after the Bail Amendment Act of 2015 commenced.
The best answer is not necessarily just educating people on remand. Halving the number of people who are in remand in the first place and shortening the period of time that people are on remand. I mean, we've seen the length of time people are on remand blow out under this government, and the delays in the district court in particular just get longer and longer and longer. But the difficulty about education on remand is nobody knows how long they're going to be in jail, because you're at the whim of the criminal justice system about when your matter comes on, if you do a plea, if you don't do a plea. So actually structuring education for somebody who's on remand is next to impossible. And the other thing is, often prisoners on remand don't have a final classification, and they just get bumped around the system, moving from prison to prison to prison to prison. Their families can't keep up with them, and you can't actually have an ongoing education program, given the way that prisoners are dealt with on remand at the moment. And if you wanted to go out to Park Lee, it's like a zoo, and that wouldn't be where you would put serious education reforms. So yes, the Greens support rolling out significant additional prison education to prisoners on remand. It's got to be accessible, but those are the challenges that are faced. And the best answer, far and away the best answer, is radically reducing the number of people on remand and the time they spend on remand.
The real diversion in terms of stopping people from getting into the imprisonment system is education, health, funding, guaranteed employment, cultural programs for young people in rural and regional Australia, and appropriately cultural programs for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. But all of that is actually setting up the population to enjoy life as opposed to be completely stressed and looking for a fast fix, excitement at the festivals in whatever form it takes, which starts to get them into a situation where they're coming across the police in a very ongoing sense. So we actually need to create a system and fund services so that young people and marginalised communities aren't coming across the police units, but also we need to change the injustice system so that the remands we reduce people. So we've got to improve the safety of prison officers as well, and we have to do that through reducing the prison population numbers, but we have to stop privatisation and increase the funding to the services within the prison system. And the other thing is improved mental health. I mean, there has to be appropriate services within the prison system, but there has to be real diversionary programs for both within the prison and to stop people from getting in. Computers for all. I mean, that's just got to happen. And it is good that we have a Liberal Party representative here today so that we can actually put these demands clearly and on record that this is what the community is demanding, and then we'll see where they come from. We'll see if they come from.
In terms of dealing with the chronic mental health problems in New South Wales jails, the NWRC is just one of a series of jails which are swamped with a number of inmates with chronic, florid, debilitating mental health issues that they simply don't have the resources to deal with. And in fact, if you were to sort of chart two graphs, the two graphs that I think would tell a large part of the story about the crisis in our prisons is the deinstitutionalisation and the defunding of mental health services from the late 70s through to now, and the massive increase in our prison population, which have become de facto holding cells without treatment for people with chronic mental health. And it's actually even worse in juvenile detention centres and in juvenile justice system. In the juvenile justice system, something like 80% of the juveniles in detention tonight will have at least one mental health condition, and the great majority of them will have 3 or more significant debilitating mental health conditions. And we pretend that we have a corrective services system. I mean, it's actually kind of critical.
With regard to educational services on remand, I certainly have information here with regard to what are the various different programs that are offered for prisoners in jails. I'm told that, I'm advised that 345 additional psychologists, community correction officers and other skilled staff have been employed by corrective services to improve rehabilitation in our presence. I'm not suggesting all of those are psychologists, but I don't know how many of those 345 are psychologists, but I'll perhaps get advice on that and be able to advise you that if I can get to the name.
But I can tell you this, mandatory sentencing looks like it will only have one benefit. The benefit is to the politicians that introduce it in the Parliament, and they only. Because it's popular, it's got overall to do with improving the community. It just makes them popular.
Important issues. We need to revise and relook at our bail laws, not just because there are far too many people being held on remand who may never get sentenced to prison at all in the long run, but also because it's encroaching much too far on the presumption of innocence. We've had quite a few mention of the Indigenous over-representation in prison and juvenile justice as well, which many juvenile individuals and Indigenous people in prison, and that's a concern I think that everybody agrees to. Though whether we can give a change is another question. We've had discussion of education in prisons and privatisation of prisons, which sort of go together in one way because education's been privatised. And this is going to be a running issue when we go to prisons. It won't stop here, it will keep going. And Megan Etheridge raised a very interesting question, interesting to me. And she's asking really, why are there so many women in prison on short sentences who do not need to be there? Especially Indigenous women who represent a huge proportion of women in prison, and many women in prison still on remand having yet been dealt with. Now, there is no need for this. Many of the responses to the questionnaire that was circulated through this forum have ticked the box about diversion, and even our government representatives have spoken about a number of justice reinvestment and diversion programs. But these are individual responses in particular cases. We need a whole of government response to the question of women in prison. We need to follow the model that's been adopted in England for many years, and which has enabled them to adopt last year a strategy of not imprisoning women on short sentences any longer. And they can move to that position because over the past 10 years they've been building up with government support all the community resources that are necessary to assist women in problems of health, housing, education, work and training and so on. This is happening there, and it could happen here, given the already dawning commitment to diversion and justice reinvestment. And the great thing about it is this is not just a program that helps women who are deemed to be offenders. It's been able to help women on an early intervention basis when trouble first arises, also at the point of bail and thereafter, and for those who have been in prison after leaving prison. So it assists women at every level who need that kind of help. So that's why I wanted to have the last word. So I can put out that idea for everyone to think about. And now I want to thank our speakers. Alistair Hinton, thank you very much. David Shoebridge and Rachel Evans. It's been fantastic to have you here to deal with all these issues. And John Bow, thank you for chairing. Do I have anything else to do? Oh, thank you to the Community Justice Coalition and ICJ for organising this. Anything else? I declare the forum closed.